Good morning, good afternoon for some of you, and thank you for joining this co-hosted Oracle and Splash BI webinar on Oracle eBusiness Suite, the scalability of IT to meet the business's ad hoc and transactional reporting needs. As I said, welcome everybody. So we all know that Oracle are committed to eBusiness Suite at the moment, and there's a couple of statements that Oracle have recently released on this subject. But what about Discoverer? So what we're going to talk about this morning with Terry, and then show you some bits of a little bit later into demonstrations with my colleague Rishabh, is what are the offers, the opportunities that you have for replacing Discoverer with Oracle and with other options. So, Terry, in your opinion, why are customers asking, what do we do with Discoverer? What's Oracle's position on transactional and operational reporting at the moment?
Yeah, so obviously, most people will be aware that Discoverer became end of life. So it moved from the Premier support, the fully patched, fully supported version back in 2014, and in 2017, it ended. It was effectively end of life as it reached the end of the extended support period. So it does leave a bit of an issue for a lot of customers that have grown to become very dependent on Discoverer. And unfortunately, in terms of what we have out of the box moving forward, the graphic I have on the screen here already sort of highlights what our key direction is in terms of using our BI XML publishers and sort of OBIAs for external customer facing documents. And a lot of people in 12.1 and 12.2 are using those on a frequent basis. And it's those purchase orders, invoice type programs, listing reports, again using BI publisher. We've got the things like the FSGs that have been built still in 12.2 that existed in 12.1. But there is that difference between those types of reports and what you'd use Discover for. So it is a challenge. Operational reports, maybe some of the people that should join today have seen our enterprise command centers, a new feature in 12.2. It's like transactional business intelligence. It's a lot more graphical to have conversations with your data. Again, you can export data, but it isn't the same. And when we look now at what we do in terms of data warehouses, we very much look at our cloud analytics products to replace the Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition that a lot of customers had as well. I think one of the key things though that I just want to highlight, that is a challenge, because whilst we have some tools, they don't operate the same way or perhaps give the same level of flexibility. And I think that's something that hopefully we'll touch on a little bit today. But one of the key things is that Oracle doesn't provide any automated mechanism to get from their Discover reports that customers have at the moment through to one of these other solutions. So I think this slide here really sort of summarizes it, that we have different tools which meet different operational requirements. And what we're trying to express here is that very much if you're that individual contributor, you're an end user of the system, maybe you're a manager, there are those FSGs, the BI reports and the command centers that you can use, and the analytics cloud very much in that sort of data warehouse discovery, analytical analysis of trending of data, for example. But what we don't really have is anything which sort of plugs that gap in terms of the flexibility that you get with Discover at the moment. So it's a key thing that I think customers understand that it is end of life. You can continue to use it, but there are some challenges using it. And we'll touch on some of those things today.
Okay, so I've got a few questions for you then, Terry. So
okay, yeah.
Is it true that whilst Discover works well with EBS 11i, it's not necessarily going to work out of the box with version 12?
So I think we've got lots of customers that are using it from 11i. Obviously, it's an older middleware product, technology product. And a lot of customers that I'd say most customers are running 12.1 and 12.1.3, the latest release, and use Discover well. The challenge if you go to 12.2, whilst it is an upgrade, there are some technical changes in terms of technical architecture. So chances are your reports will not work if you were to upgrade and just try and deploy the Discover technologies over the top of them. So unfortunately, you know, some areas will work, but there are some technical changes at an architecture level which will inhibit a number of those reports to work, so they would need some rework for sure.
And I guess with the automatic updates, automatic patching that comes into place with 12.2, that something that works today, there's no guarantee it will work tomorrow after a patch is introduced, because that could be making any changes anywhere, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think that's more applicable though to the cloud product, where you've got the quarterly releases, right, where obviously on the on-premise product, you still have that, you can download patches and apply them. Obviously, the distinction being though, there are no patches available because of the end of life for Discover. If you have a problem and there's a pre-existing fix, you can apply that. So yeah, you're right though, obviously we are still on an annual incremental release of the functionality, so absolutely, you know, there can be future changes.
Okay, so what do you think people are looking for with transactional reporting now? Is it the ability to get at all of their data? Is it to be able to run what if modeling scenarios, analytics, or is it both? Or do you think, and does Oracle think, they are actually different users? Because if, you know, looking at the screen, there's a bit of a gap that applies between the products.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that. I think it's the age-old problem, and I've been in the Oracle space for 30 odd years now, and the challenge is still about getting that live transactional data, but flexibility. I think the enterprise command centers are a fantastic way to graphically represent a set of data, but they are, you know, focused very much on a particular functional area. And, you know, custom reporting, you know, whichever technology people use, tends to pull data together from lots of different domains. So if maybe procure to pay, so you want some purchasing, some payables information, as well as customer information. The command centers are very much focused on as a purchasing or a payables command center. We're seeing people use Analytics Cloud to try and replace the OBIE products, but there is that gap. There isn't the flexibility that you get in terms of being able to drag and drop fields and do on-the-fly reporting. You have the ability to extract and, you know, or export data to Excel, but again, we're trying to discourage people from doing that, you know, too greatly because of that, you know, single source of the truth.
So with the enterprise command centers, they only work with 12.2, so you can't look at legacy data in 12.1 or 11i. How many are there at the moment? Do they apply for every module within EBS?
No, they don't apply for everything at the moment. It's something which Oracle's introduced over the last 18 months. We've got 30 command centers, as I said, they're focused on predominantly sort of functional areas, and which is culminates in over 100 dashboards, but there are gaps. To give you a couple of examples, we don't have anything across general ledger at the moment, or payroll. Doesn't mean we won't in the future, but currently there are some gaps. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think is the major difference between ECCs and Discover?
It's that flexibility really, because the ECCs is very much giving you a template of sets of information. You can customize it, you can add in additional information, but it doesn't allow you to do that drag and drop functionality that, you know, we see people, you know, love with inside a Discover product.
And with the customization, can it be done by the end user, or does it require some technical skills to cover that area?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it largely requires, you know, a technical expert in the background to enable an end user to be able to add extra fields onto a results grid, or change the visualization of a particular, you know, data element, whether it's a pie chart, a bar graph, etc. It's more technical orientated, I would say. You have the ability, like the folder functionality, to move fields around on screen, but it doesn't have that same level of flexibility that an end user can quickly generate their own custom report that you get with Discover.
Okay. So if they're not fully, ECC is not fully replacing Discover, then if you combine it with everything that you've got on the screen there to close the gap, and you know, I used OBIE for years and understand Analytics Cloud and BI Publisher, and I know you can actually make them closer together than they appear to be on the screen. But I think a fundamental issue, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they don't necessarily all understand EBS security's roles, responsibilities. It's something that you've got to build, isn't it?
Yeah, well, certainly that's the case very much for Analytics Cloud, that, you know, it's flexible, that it work over on-premise as well as our cloud products. But yes, you actually have to go build those security models. The FSGs, the command centers, they deploy the same segregation of data, roles and responsibilities that, you know, and security profiles that you may have defined. But you're right, yes, there is a gap there, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Right. So that's the slide that Terry was talking about and showed you the gap. What we're going to attempt to do now over the remainder of the webinar is show you how Splash BI will plug that gap. You're going to have to listen to me drone on a little bit for a while, and Terry will be asking me some questions, and at 2 different points during the session my colleague Rishabh will give us a couple of demonstrations of different parts of Splash BI. Let me explain to you about Splash BI. Splash BI is a fully integrated reporting and analytics solution. It comes with pre-built reports, dashboards, both of which are optional, and it does ad hoc real-time reporting, cross-application reporting. You can bring your cloud and legacy data together, so you can use it to report against EBS, Oracle Cloud, EBS 11i, 12.1, 12.2 cloud, all in the same set of reports if you want to. And it also has an optional ad hoc full discoverer migration tool. We're going to concentrate mostly on talking about Splash EBS, which I'll explain to you a bit more, and also about Splash DM, which is our discoverer migration tool. And we'll kick off with Splash EBS. So this slide shows you the combination of views and reports that we can provide straight out of the box. These come, they're maintained by us. As you can see, they will work with 11.5, 12.1, 12.2 and all future versions of EBS. And we try to facilitate simple reporting, real-time reporting across each of the Oracle EBS modules, not just financials, not just HR, but we cover supply chain, manufacturing, everything. It's not only Splash EBS isn't only about the content, it's also about the connector to EBS as well. So it controls things like roles, responsibilities, it understands how DFFs, KFFs, everything like that works. Anything that you might have in your EBS environment is picked up and analyzed and worked with by Splash EBS. And that makes life a lot easier when we're doing the reporting and when you move to discovery migration. We also have another product which I won't spend too much time talking about. It is licensed separately, it's Splash GL, and it's separate because it's not only for reporting against GLs in Oracle. So a lot of organizations out there, global organizations, you might have half a dozen companies that are using EBS, a couple that are on Oracle Cloud, and maybe 1 or 2, particularly if you're in the manufacturing environment, that are using SAP. And Splash GL will allow you to work against any of those general ledgers. And it does everything that it says on the slide there. But as I said, I'm not going to talk to that in too much detail at the moment. So at this point, I'm going to ask Rishabh, my colleague, to give us a 10-minute demonstration of the Splash EBS out of the box content and how the connector works and everything. So over to you, Rishabh.
Thank you, Grant. Let me quickly start to share my screen and we'll talk about the demonstration of Splash BI now. So we've got Splash BI and the ability to access the data analytics platform through various ways. The first way I'm accessing is through my web browser. I'm logging in using my EBS credentials. So you can actually have your home screen quite customized, but as a generic layout, what I've done is I've created a summary of my own reports that I've executed in the past, my favorite reports, which I execute on a very regular basis. And then also I have a list of all my scheduled reports or dashboards at any point of time. As you mentioned, we have a big library of pre-built reports that come out of the box. So let's move into the reports section where we'll be talking about the different reports that we have from different modules. So this particular sheet of Splash BI has access to the entire list of reports that I as a user have access to. So my all roles and responsibilities have been validated with EBS, and I can see the entire segregation in this particular menu. Let's scroll down and focus more towards Oracle eBusiness Suite, as you mentioned. So on this page, what we can see is the different applications and the reports being categorized underneath each of these. Let me pick up an example of a payables report, which is very commonly used in all organizations. And I'll try and run that particular report at the moment for you guys. So let me pick up my invoices on hold report, which is a standard report that you generally use on a very regular frequency. So I'm going to click on run, and it opens up into a new submission tab. On the left, I have all my different filters that have been pre-configured. But as Prem said, all our content is available for you guys to modify. You can create a copy of the report and modify it based on your own business process. A key aspect is the responsibility on the top, which is basically making sure that your security that is set up in EBS is being validated at all stages. Now, let me quickly submit and show you how it works further. So now my report has got completed, and this is the execution statistics for that particular report that I've run. These are the different types of output formats that are available for each and individual report that you execute, but also what you can see is on the same screen is the different executions that are there for each of these reports. So I could do a quick analysis of what was the status of my invoices on a whole report today as compared to the past month. So I could easily go in and open the output from a previous month as well. Let's take a look at each of these outputs one by one. So the first one is my HTML output, which opens up within the same browser tab, and it will give you the entire information of all the invoices that are on hold, as it says in the report name. Now, you can actually do a lot of ad hoc removal of columns and also, do certain operations that you would generally do in an Excel. At the same time, with Splash BI, what we've given you is the enhanced capability of using drill downs. So as you can see, these two columns, which is my supplier name and the invoice number, are hyperlinked further. So if I wanted to see more information related to a particular invoice, I would click on that, and then a pop-up functionality, I can see the entire invoice level information. And again, this comes out of the box, but at the same time, the drill down capability is something that the users can easily create themselves as well. Coming back to our previous page where I was talking about the other output formats, as you can see, we have a list of output formats: PDF, CSVs, XML, and Excel, of course. And then we've also got the web pivot format. And I'll explain what a web pivot basically is. So with reporting, you obviously have a certain, summarizations that you make. But the summarizations are generally, used as a pivot format in Excel. So what we made was we created a web pivot format, which would give you the summarization within the web browser itself. So in this case, my entire data of the report of the invoices on hold was summarized by hold amounts by supplier and the remaining amount by actually hold name that was actually in the EBS menus. Now you could create all of these and access the same output through the browser as well as through Excel. Now let's move in and talk about Excel. Again, highly used by all the users. And this is, as you can see on my screen now, a Splash BI specific menu that's attached to my Excel. So we have an Excel Connect, which allows you to basically run the same report from directly within Excel. So now I'm gonna again go in and click on run, and I have access to all my reports that are there. And I can now run the same report. So if I would search for my invoices on hold reports, and then in front of the same report name, I've got a run button option available. Again, I'll click on run. And the first aspect that you see is the roles and responsibilities. So you can be sure that even though I'm accessing the data through Excel, through the Excel Connect plugin that we have, you are still able to make sure that the security is validated. And then I can click on submit. So the report goes into a submitting state. Once done, you can actually see the data downloaded within the Excel, which is open in the background. And then you can still continue to do all your Excel related operations. Now, when we were using the web format, we were also focusing on a specific functionality that, as I laid out, a drill down. So it's also important for us to maintain the same functionality, although the user is using the report within Excel Connect now. In this case, you can see I've got the invoice number, and if I double click on that, it opens up the same invoice level information in a separate Excel sheet. So the functionality remains the same. You have got access to the entire data that you have in that particular report, whether you're accessing through your Splash BI web version, or you are mostly into financials and you're working through your Excel Connect plugin. In this case, you have all your summarizations as well. So as you can see, there are multiple sheets in this particular Excel workbook. And this was my amount hold by supplier that we showcased earlier in the web part also. And then we also have the summarization of the remaining amount by the hold name. From an auditing perspective, you always have a track of who executed the report, what was the report used for, what were the filters that were used for, as highlighted in this particular section. And then you could easily create it like a similar sort of a month-end package, and you could just come in and refresh your entire data with the new date parameters. Back to you, Graham.
Can you take us back to the HTML page, please,
Sure.
Rishabh? And can you just give us a little bit of an explanation of schedule distribution and bursting?
Of course. So what we have here is the submission page of that particular report. And as you can see on the top, we've got certain small icons which basically talk about the scheduling capability of the product. And we've got multiple options available. A simple schedule, which could be just start today and end on so-and-so date. And an advanced schedule, which talks about your advanced portions where you can define a pattern of execution of a report. So I want the report to run on a particular month, on a particular day. So I can actually define all of that within Splash BI. You could use scheduling and distribution as separate functionalities, but most of our business users, they schedule a report and say that I want the report output directly delivered to my email address before 9 o'clock in the morning on every Monday, and they can then combine it using this particular page. So you can distribute it based on your email, your FTP or a file system. And there are certain small checks that we've added based on specific feedback that we've got from a lot of our customers, like, can I password protect my output that is being sent out? So any secure reports that go out through Splash BI, again, are password protected. And then at the same time, trying to understand the user's feedback, we added certain checks like distribute only when it's greater than 0 rows. So the end user is basically, responsible, and he understands when the distribution has even gone out. Now, Graham also mentioned something about the bursting functionality. Now, for EBS, you have your bursting functionality, and within Splash BI, you can define your own bursting criteria as well. So it's similar to running this particular payables report, and then I can split it by different departments, or in this case, different suppliers, and then say, okay, I want only supplier A's information to go to supplier A. So if I define a criteria for a particular supplier name, I can easily just do that within Splash BI and define it. Okay, for supplier A, I need the information to go to a particular email address. So I'm doing it once, avoiding redundantly, running that particular report for different suppliers, and then just sharing only the validated information with the individual users.
Okay, thanks, Rishabh. Thanks very much.
Personally, I think this is fantastic. Oracle obviously provides a lot of pre-built reports, but they are quite restricted, and obviously needs a lot of technical effort to customize them. I think the flexibility that you've just been able to demonstrate with your pre-built content is amazing. And obviously, it is complementary to a lot of what Oracle gives you, but it gives you increased flexibility to be able to manipulate those. But, that's the pre-built. What about the Discover reports and everything? Can you talk a little bit, Graham, about, how you'd migrate, the differences of, a custom built versus what you've pre-built?
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to what we call Splash DM then, which is our Discover and migration utility. It's a free utility. Anybody that buys Splash BI can get this utility free, and you'll see when we talk a little bit in a minute as to how the utility can be used. It can be used by us, it can be used by yourselves, or it can be a combination of the two. But what I'd like to talk about is, don't just cut and paste the SQL. because if you do, that doesn't protect your investment. It doesn't keep your Discoverer workbooks intact. It doesn't do a like for like. And I'll also talk about our customer use cases as well. So as I said, this is a free utility, and I'm afraid you're going to have to suffer me talking a little bit at the moment. So the information on this slide is apparent. Anybody that's been using Discoverer for the last 20 years or so, any time in that since it was first released back in the very, very late 90s, you've probably spent thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even more, hundreds of thousands if you add up everything that you spend on building your workbooks, creating your business areas, creating cross-business area reporting, the amount of time that your users have spent on training, the cost of training. It's a huge investment that many organizations have made, and you can see why with that investment some organizations are still prepared to take the risk that it works, and until it breaks, I'm going to continue using it. You know, I wouldn't necessarily advocate that, but it certainly is the case. What we will try to show you over the next 15-20 minutes is how Splash BI using our Discover and Migration utility protects all of that investment. So it keeps your workbooks intact. All of these things that you see here, if you do a straightforward cut and paste of the SQL, which a lot of companies are advocating out there's a lot of consulting companies and other solution companies that are offering that as a service. All of these things here, group bys, color codes, custom folders, cross-tab layouts, page items, they just get ignored. They can't be picked up and they won't be recorded. Even DFS, KSS, something as simple as that, and maintaining the DFS, KSS. But the most important thing that we find is that unless you do a proper migration, the report that your user ends up with, the user can't edit it. It needs skills like it did with the enterprise command centers to be able to maintain those and edit them. So, you know, you are losing all of that investment you've made in the knowledge that your users have built up with their, you know, the knowledge they have of how to report out of EBS, and they won't be able to do it. So let's move on a little bit. Lost my cursor, sorry. So if you use our Splash Discover and Migration utility, and Rishab will show you this shortly in a minute, what you start with on the left hand side is this is what you get out of the Discoverer. You have an EUL. Within that EUL it has business areas which have folders, joins, item classes, and then you have workbooks and worksheets. A workbook can consist of many worksheets, and each worksheet will have columns, conditions, etc. So you run that through the Splash DM utility, and what you get is a like for like. The naming conventions are slightly different, but it will seamlessly migrate all of your workbooks and components to create fully functional ad hoc capable reports. An EUL becomes a business area, a workbook and a worksheet become report sets, and reports, columns are columns, etc. And everything is the same. Nothing is lost or changed. I said I'd talk a little bit about customer use cases on our migration utility itself, because the utility is free and we can provide it to our customers. And you'll see in the right hand column here where it says self, a number of our customers have taken the utility and actually migrated their own reports. We have a huge healthcare customer in the US that was one of the first to use our migration utility a few years back. They had 1,983 Discoverer workbooks, and they decided they wanted to take on the task themselves. And within 42 days, they had successfully migrated 1,978 of them on their own. And they had a team of people that became the most skilled Discoverer migration experts anywhere in the world. And then they switched off Discoverer, and those people no longer had to use those skills again, or would never use them again. The 5 unsuccessful workbooks were, 2 of them were because they were actually built in Discoverer 4, if anybody can remember what Discoverer 4 looked like, and the others were didn't work because they no longer had custom tables that were used anymore. But Yeah, so it can be done as an offshore exercise. We will take it on. We can normally work on the basis that we will migrate a minimum of 50 workbooks per week per individual person that we put on the project. We have 7 migration projects running simultaneously just for the UK and EMEA customers at the moment. And as well as it being done through us or by the customer themselves, we've had a couple of customers that have done it through partners. So customers that are using managed service partners that have become Splash BI partners. And we've had a couple of customers that have done it as a bit of a hybrid exercise. So we do the first 10 for them, show them what's done, how it's done, and then they get on with the rest. The biggest exercise at the start, though, is determining what workbooks do they actually want to migrate. And we have a tool, a set of scripts that will help them do that. It will look at what's been operated, what workbooks have been used in the past period. They can use any period. We normally suggest they use 15 months because certain year-end reports only get used at specific times. And it will be able to tell them whether a user is still now there working and whatever. And it manages to reduce the number of workbooks greatly that people think they have, particularly Duke. And let's get Rishab to do his magic again and share his screen if we can.
Perfect. Thank you, Graham. Right, so yeah, we talked about the Discover migration utility a bit, and Graham talked about how the entire project works as a like for like. So I'm gonna try and focus towards that particular aspect. Now, when we logged in earlier, we saw this same home screen, but now let's focus mostly towards that Discover migration utility. It's a part of the administrator's functionality, and someone who has control over the Discoverer instance and they know what they're going to be migrating at. So under the administrative functionality in Splash BI, you have utilities, a smaller module that's going to focus specifically on how you can migrate your workbooks from Discoverer. And before I go in and talk about and show you how a Discoverer migration works, let's just take a minute and understand what a Discoverer migration project entails. So as Graham said, we've got a Discover usage part of the utility, which will give you an understanding of what reports were used, at what frequency they were used, and you can probably understand, let's say for the past 15 months, the workbooks that have been executed, they have a priority that's going to be validated by the business, and then you can migrate those particular workbooks. So this utility will give you an idea of what reports that you can prioritize for your migration as well. Now, with our utility, what we're doing is we're not just migrating a particular workbook, we are migrating your entire Discoverer estate, starting from a perspective of migrating your EULs, which become a business application in Splash BI, and the overall individual business areas that you have, they become domains. And based on those business areas are your Discoverer workbooks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now try and talk to you about the Discoverer migration of an individual workbook. So I've migrated a smaller business area, which is only a one-time activity, so you don't have to do it again and again. And this stage, you are basically migrating your Discoverer workbook. To be able to do that, what you need to do is you need to export your Discoverer workbook from Discoverer as a .eex format, or you can group them and upload it as a zip file within Splash BI. So if I go in and click on choose file, and for this particular example, I've picked up a GL account balances report that was created custom, and I'm gonna now click on submit. So at this stage, what the product's doing is it's trying to understand. So our utility is trying to understand what are the different components that are there. Who was the owner of that particular workbook? What was the security behind it? And at the same time, what was the business area they were built on? So I can see that particular workbook had multiple sheets within it, and the person who was the owner of that particular workbook. So my security carries forward. And at the same time, what business area is it actually developed on? And now this screen can be taken up as an advantage to clean up the system. So if there are certain sheets that were not utilized by the business in the last 15 months or whatever duration that threshold you deem necessary, you can choose to migrate individual workbooks. In my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 3 worksheets and I'm just going to click on migrate. So now the product's basically initiating a process on our side to migrate the individual worksheets. So what I can see is I have 3 processes that were generated, which were talking about the migration. So let me pick up an example of this subtotals worksheet. Click on that. So now it says a report was created successfully, but it will give you a complete idea of what was created, what were the different things that were there, like the layouts, tables, columns, and the security that was already embedded within that particular workbook. So it took me maybe more than 3 minutes to try and migrate a particular workbook. And now we have converted that workbook into an equivalent report within Splash BI. So now let's go into the reports and see the actual report and how it looks when you execute it within within the Splash BI interface. So let me bring up those workbooks now. Yeah, so now you can see is the 3 different worksheets that got migrated. And let me pick up an example of my subtotals sheet in this case. And I can see it was 0 minutes ago. And in this case, I am seeing the owner's name. You have an option to see who migrated or who last modified that report, but I have set it up as an owner. So let's click on run. And what I see is on the left side, the different filters that were there within that particular Discoverer workbook. Any default values that were there, they are also present and with the same set of conditions. Like in this case, these particular values were made mandatory. So in the meantime, the report works. I can talk to you about this particular section. So I've clicked on submit and it's in a processing state. Once completed, it's going to show up as a completed process. Now, again, similar to what we earlier saw, I can see the individual types of output that I have for the same workbook. And if I now go in and open my first output type, which is the HTML output, this is how it looks basically within Splash BI. And now you can see that the formatting was constant, which was continued from Discoverer. Any sort of a cross-tab layout that was there, it is being continued further. And at the same time, let me give you a quick view on how the Discoverer report actually looked in the Discoverer administrative view when I saw that. So you can compare this output to the output that's available within Splash BI. And this time we're just talking about the HTML output as such. Right, going back to the submission page, I can see the past submissions of my particular workbook as well, but I have other options and the other output types that are also available. Now, when we talked about in the previous demonstration that we have the ability to run these reports from directly within Excel. So the same functionality continues further. So let me go into my Excel and switch over to Splash BI's plugin. So now I can again go in and now I'm going to run that specific worksheet that we just saw, or I can even download the last request that we had on that particular GL report. So as you can see, on the top is my GL report that was there, and I can now open the output type directly from within Excel. So the same functionalities of Splash BI continue further even though I'm accessing it through Excel. And I can now create any of my calculations on this particular tab or even see the cross-tab summaries that were there. And still the auditing also remains constant throughout. So what we've done is that we've seen a Discoverer report get migrated with all its exceptions, all its custom formulas that were there in that particular workbook. And then we've also run it as a user or as a business user who's actually running it on month end from both Excel and the Splash BI web interface.
Thank you, Rishabh. Great.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks very much.
Looks very good, but I've got to ask, as the non-technical person in the room, what's the catch? It looked too quick, too easy, too simple. Even I could do it. Well, hopefully. So, what's the catch? There must be one.
The catch. Okay, so we don't claim to be 100% successful. All right, we do claim to be anything between 85 and 98% successful. All right. There are certain things that we can't migrate. So to give you an example, one would be a pivot table on text data. It's the and these are things that we're finding the more customers that we work with, each time the utility gets enhanced and becomes better and better and better. But there are certain things like that which we've just encountered for 2 customers, which, rather than trying to make the utility do it, the easiest thing to do is export the part of the workbook that we can, put that into Splash BI, and then edit the report in Splash BI to provide that functionality.
Oh, great.
So
I like you obviously showed a slide where it had lots of customers where they were doing it themselves.
Yep.
You mentioned that, and also you work with customers as well. I mean, what are the common pitfalls that you'll see? And obviously you mentioned that there are a few anomalies that you keep uncovering. Are there any other sort of common mistakes people make?
Yeah, so again, it depends on, with the customer, are we working with and selling into the business area or IT? And
Right.
I think, and the reason that has a variation is because of the way UAT works. So if a customer, and everybody will have hopefully read that we've recently closed a deal with City of Edinburgh Council, and we're migrating over 300 workbooks for them. It's quite a complicated project. It's work done in conjunction with one of our partners, Claremont, who are doing the EBS upgrade piece.
Yeah, very good.
We do the migration from 11i, from Discoverer to Splash BI, and then we release the reports 50 a week for their finance team to actually do the UAT. And then when they do the second phase, the upgrade, we will then upgrade the reports to work with 12.2, because there is an element of where 12.2, as you said earlier, the table structures are slightly different, particularly in GL.
Yeah.
So that is quite a simple way of doing it, but the onus is on the customer to make sure they have the UAT resources available, because there's little point in us migrating 50 reports a week if they can't turn the UAT around within 10 days.
Yeah.
If a customer does it on their own, then the pitfalls are, maybe they don't understand enough yet about Splash BI, and we have to do more training to accomplish that. The biggest pitfall to the customer at the end of it is that they've developed a skill that they're never going to have to use again. So it's a bit of a waste. We have had a couple of customers that have insisted on doing that purely because of the type of workbooks that they have, the type of data that they have. But we don't actually, even when we do the migration offshore, we don't touch the data. We only take the metadata and everything that consists in the EUL. Obviously, Discoverer doesn't store any of the data, so we don't take any of the data with it. That's why we have to return it for UAT.
That's good. That's useful insights. I mean, I appreciate the audience have probably got some questions. Final question from me, I guess, is I'm speaking to lots of customers about the upgrade from 12.1 to 12.2, or they're at that junction of, do I upgrade or do I go to cloud? Mm-hmm. If somebody, what I'm speaking. When I speak to a lot of customers at the moment, they're considering upgrading to on-premise at the moment as a short to mid-term thing, 3 to 5 years, and then whilst they're planning perhaps a cloud migration, if they invest in the product now, is that going to be obsolete? Does your product work with cloud as well?
So just as we have Splash EBS, we have what we call Splash OC, which probably stands for Oracle Cloud. And in the same way as we currently have 1,400 pre-built reports for EBS, we currently have nearly 700 now for cloud. And as more modules are released in cloud, so we're releasing more reports. So we have currently for ERP financials, HCM, payroll, and also for SCM, which so as manufacturing becomes more acceptable within the cloud, so we will release reports for those. And it's quite a simple exercise to move a customer, and we actually have customers that are using legacy data either in an Oracle database or in EBS 11i. They're currently on 12.1 and they're upgrading to 12.2, and they've also already moved HCM to the cloud.
Great stuff.
And,
Thanks for that.
so, and they can report across everything on that. Hopefully, Terry and our audience, we have managed to show you that Splash BI does fill that gap. Terry, anything you want to add at this stage?
No, you know, what I love about it is the pre-built content, the speed, the ease of the migration. You know, as an end user, I can migrate it. You know, I don't have to rely on IT. So I think that's fantastic. And certainly, it does plug the gap between, you know, the fantastic capability of ECCs and what you get in Analytics Cloud, but don't really lend itself to the custom reporting or ad hoc reporting that Cisco report users are very used to. So fantastic. Thanks for that, guys.
Yeah, we're a Splash BI and EIS, our other company, are both Oracle partners. We're an Oracle on Cloud partner, as well as being Oracle Platinum and Oracle Gold partners. We don't profess to be competitive to Oracle. We compete with Oracle on occasions, but we're certainly very complementary to Oracle. You know, and most of our customers will have most of those products that you're seeing on the screen at the moment. You know. One last slide I'd like to talk about. This is a recent customer that we won in the last few weeks, and this is how they announced their project internally to their HCM staff. So they're using Splash BI to replace Discoverer for HCM and payroll reporting. That's payroll GB and payroll IE. And this is what they published internally, which is quite interesting, the way that they did it. And it's been a very successful start to the project.